Um, so hello everybody. It's nice seeing you again if you went to the mixer on Monday. Thank you for attending this workshop about clinical and translational research. Today we have Dr. Cecilia Patino here as our guest speaker from the USC Southern California um, Clinical and Translational Science Institute. Dr. Patino, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. And first of all, thank you for having us. I'm just very excited to be here with you, and hopefully we can bring you a perspective of careers in clinical and translational research. So I am a medical doctor. I also have a PhD in epidemiology, which my MD I obtained from my university in Argentina. I am originally from Argentina. And then I did my PhD at USC in epidemiology. And I also have a master's in education from my university in Argentina. At USC, I'm in the Department of Population and Public Health Sciences. I'm an associate professor. And some of the things that I do within USC is I lead a master's program in clinical translational research. And together with our team here, we have an NIH training grant in clinical translational research. And that's important to tell you because we think about this all the time of how to train mostly doctors, but some psychologists, anybody who's in the medical field to become proficient investigators that get funding, that build teams, and that create protocols for really exciting research questions that they want to ask. But the most important thing is that they do rigorous and reproducible research so that the findings actually apply into the real world. So that's what our team here that are here, that's what we are striving to do. The big goal is that we do research in such a rigorous way that the results will actually make a impact on our populations. How exciting is that, right? So the overall goal for today is to describe the field of clinical and translational research for you. And most importantly, to talk about career opportunities aligned with this field. Please feel free to ask questions at any point. If you could do it in the chat, and maybe someone can alert me if there's a question, and I'll stop and respond to it. I would love if you would do that. So again, the overall goal is to describe the field of clinical and translational research and career opportunities aligned with the field. So I'm very interested in knowing who you are. So I would love to know, and if you could just put in the chat, write in the chat one expectation that you have of this presentation. I'll give you just 1 or 2 minutes. Thank you. As we go, you can keep adding. Thank you so much. So let's start with some definitions. What is clinical translational research? What's different between this type of research and any other type of research in animal models or in human models? So the simple answer is that it's research that moves scientific discoveries into actual solutions that improve human health. So no matter what type of research it is, it could be in cells, it can be in animal models, it can be in, a few number of patients, large number of patients, as long as the research question is aligned to producing results that in the end will improve human health, we can call that clinical and translational research. Some practical examples are almost everything medical teams do for patients is a result of clinical translational research. So diagnostic studies, treatment studies, studies that tell us what risk factors for dying of a disease. All those types of studies are clinical translational research studies. The development and testing of lab tests, medications, vaccinations, a dietary advice, surgery. So maybe this can help you think about an area where you think is within the realm of clinical and translational research. Maybe you can think of an example and also put it in the chat. Any type of study that you know that could improve the health of humans. Maybe it could be a drug. Maybe it could be a activity, an exercise. COVID-19 vaccine, very good. So effects of smoking, very good, Juan. What could be an intervention, for example, for the effects of smoking? First of all, just knowing, that would be a translational research question. Knowing the effects of smoking, that would be really important. And then maybe some intervention. Once we know, yes, perfect, respiratory therapy. That would be a perfect intervention in this field. Let's see if we can get one more example. Come on, you can do it. Finding new ways to decrease hospital-borne illnesses. Perfect. Great. So I want to show you the most current framework for clinical translational research. And this comes from the National Institutes of Health. And the framework, what it's trying to depict is how we move discoveries that improve the health of populations. So you can see in this picture, there's a couple of things. There's this ring outside, which tells us what the goals are. So to develop new approaches. So not only develop them, but make sure and demonstrate that they're useful. And not only, for example, show that they're useful and publish them, but making sure that we disseminate the findings and they're actually making an impact on humans. And so this model puts the patient involvement in the center. It's key of whatever type of research we're doing, that patients be involved in informing what we do. And there's different steps in doing clinical translational research. All the ones that are in this color, which I would call kind of like a bluish greenish. So we have preclinical research, which is the research we do in cells, in animals, in first human studies, but just a small number of humans who are, for example, we're trying to understand if there's some efficacy of a medication. So this is preclinical research. Then we have clinical research where these larger 20, 30, hundreds of people who we are including in our studies to test for interventions, to know what the prevalence of a disease is, understanding what we need to do to improve the quality of life of individuals. These are all clinical research studies, which is the next phase. And once we show that, we show that some interventions have shown to be efficacious, that means that they worked in humans, then we have to figure out the next step is how we're going to disseminate those findings and implement them in the real world. And there's a whole area of science that's called clinical implementation. And actually it's broader than that because it's dissemination and implementation. So once we come up with efficacious interventions and we're able to implement them in the real world, then we're going to make an impact on public health. So you see here this other circle, which is basic research. Basic research is usually research in animal models, in cells. And the reason why it's in a different color and it's not part of the clinical translational research paradigm is because not all basic research actually goes into this preclinical research. Some may, but some doesn't. So this could be trying to understand, why dolphins are dying in certain areas of the world. That is, or not, that's not a good example, but maybe studying some cells in animal models that the results will never come to humans because it's not pertinent. So again, the model is that clinical translational research has a preclinical research area, a clinical research area, clinical implementation, and public health. Any questions on this? So each field has specific scientific and operational principles and is informed through patient involvement. I really like this schema. Does anybody think, is this clear? Do you like this schema that NIH came up with? Yes, I have one hand, yes. Any questions about this?
I have a question. So the model is mostly of clinical research and probably really heavy on patient involvement. Does this only apply to perhaps wet labs? Can dry labs be a part of this model in terms of, let's say, data analysis that actually helps with maybe developing some sort of program or tool that patients can use to, let's say, gauge what kind of treatment is best for intervention?
Yes, that's a perfect example. Yep. So that seems like a kind of a diagnostic prognostic test, maybe. And I would put it in clinical research, but it could start here trying to understand. So yes. Any other question about this? As long as whatever you're doing research in, and it has the potential to impact human health at different stages, I think you can consider it you can put it into one of these buckets and consider it clinical translational research. So just one example of a clinical translational research, how it's going. So COVID-19 vaccines were created in record time to prevent millions of deaths globally. So that's a really tangible, recent clinical translational research success. So where does clinical translational research, where does it happen? What people and where are they doing this? So it happens in universities and academia, where they make discoveries, do the preclinical work, participate in clinical trials. But it also happens in hospitals and clinics, where the participants who are in trials, that's where they're from, and where the system is delivering treatments. It also happens in pharma and biotech, where we're making discoveries and developing and testing and manufacturing drugs and devices. It also happens in communities, so participating in research, enjoying better health. And it also happens in the government level. So the government is funding research, and it's funding heavily clinical translational research. It's giving us a framework to ensure safety in this research. Before I go, any questions on this? So I think the goal of showing you this slide is that you don't have to be at a university to do clinical translational research. You could do it basically almost anywhere where it's important to come up with discoveries that improve human health. So clinical and translational researchers, what do they do? There's a couple of things that they do. So in preclinical research, this is the fundamental research into normal biology and abnormalities with disease. It's conducted in labs using molecules, cells, and animal models of disease. And it's critical for discoveries and proof of concept studies before moving to humans. So an example, for example, is testing a potential cancer treatment in a mouse model of cancer. And the training and skills for this part of clinical translational researcher is mostly, they are PhD level scientists. The skill varies by topic, mostly biology, research, methodology, biostatistics, and life science related. Any questions here or comments? Anybody interested in this type of research? Yes. Kelsey, tell me more. No? There you go. Currently in a lab doing this type of research, Diana. Can you expand just a little bit more, Diana?
Hello. Can
Hi.
everyone hear me? Yes. So right now I'm in an internship at Cedars where we're recreating a nature paper. It was on fast mimicking diet and double positive breast cancer in menopausal women. So right now we are just doing right now we're doing we're growing cells, we're testing the medication. So we're kind of going through all of this right now. Right now it's in the early testing phases. We're, doing the tests, troubleshooting.
Are you starting with human cells or with an animal cells?
Human cells. So we have an MCF7 line.
Nice. Very nice. So you're not interacting with patients or humans, you're acting with cells of humans.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect example. Then we have clinical studies, for example, trials where new treatments are tested to see if they work in humans. For example, patients receive a treatment, one group receives a treatment, another group receives a placebo to evaluate if the treatment works better. So for example, testing new COVID-19 vaccines, testing if virtual reality improves memory. So the training here, there's many roles here. Leaders generally licensed in a clinical field like medicine, nursing, or psychology. And here's just an example. Scientists make a vaccine they think might work. Small first tests for safety. Those are called, they have a specific name. Those are phase 1 and phase 2 clinical trials. So first, when we come up with a new intervention that's a drug, for example, we have to make sure that, first of all, it's safe. And then we have to understand if it actually works. So in phase 1 and 2, that's what those trials are for. And once we show that they're safe and there's a possibility that it will have effect in humans, then we do a bigger study with more participants called the phase 3 study and see if it's safe and does it work in a larger population. And once we prove that, then we get the approval from different entities, and then we do ongoing monitoring of people who get the vaccine, for example. So has anyone ever read a paper of a clinical trial or have been part of a team that's doing a clinical trial? Yes, Kelsey. Can you give us an example? So are you doing any of these studies, either phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, or ongoing monitoring of people who get the vaccine, the intervention? Maybe not. That's okay. We're reviewing the data. Okay, great. So other types of clinical translational studies, for example, studies about adherence and non-adherence to therapies, studies about adverse events to interventions, studies about increasing recruitment to clinical studies in diverse populations, studies about preventing loss to follow-up of clinical studies, studies about lack of access to care among vulnerable populations. And there are many, many other examples, but I just want to make you excited that this field, it's about studying diseases, processes, anything that will help interventions get to populations and make a positive effect as soon as possible. So also epidemiology and population science, for example, these are large scale studies of people where they live to identify distributions and determinants of health and risks. This is really important because when we do these types of study on a big scale in large populations, this gives us a lot of ideas of, what the problems are in the population and what interventions we have to come up with to deal with them. The application of the information to reduce risk and health and improve health. For example, identifying smoking as a risk factor for lung cancer, identifying air pollution as a risk factor for asthma exacerbations. The training and skills in this area are mostly PhD or master's degrees, lots of work with communities and populations, and lots of work with big data. Then there's this other area of research called healthcare delivery research. And part of that is dissemination implementation research. So this type of research helps us increase the effect of how to improve how proven treatments are actually provided to the patients in the real world. Because it's not enough to come up with new interventions that in very confined and very controlled studies have shown that they're efficacious, that they actually work. For example, an antibiotic or a physical activity interventions. This type of research, what it does is, once we know that something works, how do we disseminate it and make sure that everyone has access to it and that it actually works in the real world? Examples of this is using safe surgery checklist in the operating room, testing if groups visits work as well as individual patient visits. The training and skills here are many roles. Leaders generally licensed in a clinical field and work within a hospital and clinical staff and administration environment. Then we have community engaged research, where the researchers are partnering with community groups for the research that improves community health. Some examples of that is studying the usefulness of an app for pregnant moms to monitor their health, or studying if nutrition labels lead to reductions in fast food habits. The training skills for this is mostly a PhD, some masters in public health. You have to have excellent interpersonal and communication skills to be able to interact with the community, and deep community roots help. So clinical and translational research, who's on the team? Some examples. So in each of these fields has a specific specific scientific and operational principles, but all of them are informed by community or patient involvement. Some research team members cross translational areas, and others are specific to a translational area. So in preclinical research, who are the people that are on the team? So biologists, chemists, engineers, veterinarians, and human researchers. In clinical and dissemination implementation research, where we're trying to translate preclinical results to humans, to patients, and to practice, who's the team here? They're made up of physicians, nurses, other clinicians, project managers, study coordinators, pharmacists, regulatory experts, statisticians, data scientists, scientific writers, ethicists, and fundraisers. And I'm sure we're missing a couple more that we could come up with, and I came up with a couple of more. For example, occupational and physical therapists, psychologists, dentists. So there's almost opportunity for anyone who's interested in this type of research to be part of this type of, to become a team member of this in this type of research. And then in public health, you have population scientists, epidemiologists, community members, policymakers. Any questions? Is anyone like attracted to any of these possible, like would anybody want to be a fundraiser? I would say that's one of the hardest parts of research, of getting funded, getting the money that you need. But so you need to have these skills. For that, you need to be someone who is really good at writing grants and getting donations. But that's really important because if we don't have the money, we can't even do the research, right? So this is a crucial part of clinical translational research and probably any type of research. Any questions or comments on this one? I'm sure that all of you could find some love, a little bit of love for one of these careers.
I think there's a question in the chat.
I wish I could see it. Can you read it, Athena?
Yes, it says, can some professions intercross the different roles?
Oh, what a great question. And absolutely yes. Yes. There are, you know, a physician can be a physician can be a statistician. They can write. They can be a data scientist. Yes, yes, absolutely. It's not that these are all separate things. The same person can have various of these, be proficient in various of these areas.
Maybe can I ask another question?
Yeah.
What's the difference between data scientist and statistician, since you have them listed as separate?
So I would say a statistician main role is to analyze the data of a research study, right? A data scientist is proficient in data sources that can be transformed in that we can ask data research questions, but like data sources from the government, from you know, a department of health. Each one of those have different data sets. So how to first of all understand the data that each of them has, how that data is actually stored. How do you get that data into a database that then you can ask questions about that? So it's someone who's an expert in data. And we have so many, Athena, we have so many resources now. You know, within the Clinical Translational Science Institute, there's a whole group that does that. And what they do is provide data sets from all over the world and settings, so that researchers, all they have to do is go and find that data and ask questions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think they're probably more of like a macro level then, where a statistician is a lot more focused on specific
analyzing the data. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah. The data scientists are really trying to prioritize, you know, there's so much data that's collected in the world, and trying to understand what data that exists we can use for research, be it from the government, from NIH, from community centers, from a hospital. All that data, for example, the medical, you know, the medical records. Mm. That's data that's out there that for years we haven't been using. And now it's in an electronic health records. And now we're being able to use that data to ask questions about it, mm-hmm, without having to recruit a patient.
Yep. Terrific. Thank you.
Yeah. So again, who's on the team? So these are all future jobs for maybe all of you. So you can be a clinical research coordinator. So these are professionals that manage and coordinate clinical studies, ensuring that they adhere to protocols and regulations. This is like, for me, one of the most important roles in a research team, the research coordinator. Without research coordinators, I can assure you we can't do high quality research. Then you have the clinical research scientists. These are the ones the people that design and conduct experiments. They analyze data, they contribute to the development of new therapies or treatments. Then you have the clinical study or trial manager. That person is responsible for planning, executing, and overseeing clinical trials. Clinical trials are studies about interventions. And the clinical or the trial manager also is related or does work in the budget management and team coordination. So as I read these, just think about all the different roles that are possible in this world. We're all trying, the goal is similar for anybody who's in this world with different jobs, to improve the health of our populations by doing really high quality research. But look at all the different things that have to happen to be able to do that. So I think there's a place for almost anyone in this world. Then you have a clinical data manager that focuses on collecting, managing, and analyzing clinical trial data or any type of clinical study to ensure that it's accurate and compliant. Then you have the biostatistician who uses statistical methods to analyze data from clinical trials or any other type of study, clinical translational study, helping to interpret results and make informed decisions. So my question to the group is, have you ever collaborated or talked to any of these people that do this part of clinical translational research? Can anybody give me an example? Have you talked to a coordinator, to a scientist, to a data manager? Does anybody have an example that they could share?
Well, for us at the lab, we kind of have all of these people there. So we have our research coordinators, we have research associates, techs, everything. But we did have to outsource a biostatistician. Not outsource, but we had to go to another lab to have them look at our stuff.
Yeah, that happens because sometimes the group that you have doesn't have the expertise in a statistical method. So then you have to collaborate with someone else.
Yeah,
right?
so that's one example. I had no idea what they were talking about, but it was pretty cool.
So if it's pretty cool and you don't understand, just imagine when you do understand. It's going to be so cool. So very cool. Now, there's other people who are on the team. There's medical writers. So these are the people who prepare documentation such as study protocols, regulatory submissions, and scientific publications. Many times the researchers are the medical writers, but truthfully, there's a whole industry out there of medical writers that can help researchers who are actually collecting the data, analyzing the data, and writing drafts to make sure that the medical writers, like it's, I don't know if, Athena, you've ever had the experience of when you doing research, is that everything happens. You have the data, you've presented it at a conference, it got really good reviews, but it never got published.
Mm-hmm.
How many times has that happened?
All the time. All the time.
Right? So
I think a lot of teams that I've spoken to, they always say, we have no one to help us write.
Exactly. So this is a really important, and I think actually very interesting and crucial team member is having a medical writer. And then you have regulatory affair specialists. These are people that ensure that research and clinical trials comply with regulatory requirements and helps with submissions to regulatory authorities. These are about studies about interventions, for example, drugs. They have to go through this phase of regulatory to make sure that, first of all, the studies were done well, it's efficacious, the side effects or adverse events are not because all intervention, especially for the drugs, some people are going to have adverse events, but not enough to preclude it being accepted and made available to the population. You need pharmacovigilance specialists.
Quick question. I'm sorry to interrupt, Dr. Patino. Yep. I'm so curious about this medical writer role. I feel like in all of my, not for me personally, I mean, because I feel like all the work I've ever been involved in, the politics and territoriality behind authorship order and status are so important. And I'm so curious where a medical writer who's sort of like plugged into just write, how that affects something like an authorship order, particularly if you're doing like a peer-reviewed publication.
So the medical writer is not part of the team. Sometimes, it doesn't get to be author.
So it's almost like a ghost writer. To some extent, in like a different context.
I would say they're part of the team. They understand, they work with the team. They have to interact with the team to understand the science, but they are science medical, right? So they have a lot of expertise. They get paid, but they are not an author in the paper because they were not part of the scientific piece of the study. So, for example, I can give you an example, not of a research study, but for example, writing grants. I would say the majority of people that write big grants have medical writers who help them write the grant. And they are not part, they don't get funded in the grant, or
I could see the grant piece. I know that's really common.
And in the medical piece, the writer interacts with it's not that they write the whole paper and the investigator is not part of it, right? Is because I think that maybe is what you're worried about, that there's not enough input of the authors that are on the paper.
I think I've not been, my research is all behavioral and testing out behavioral interventions. And, in any place I've been, whether it's been in universities for graduate school, or it's been part of a community-based, research center, or wherever I've been doing research in different teams, the authorship is it's such a hot topic, like there's different rules at different places. Well, I'm the PI, so I'm always lead author, even though they may not write anything because it was their study that they conceptualized. And it's just, I just find it so interesting that someone could come in and do the labor of writing and not, even though they weren't participating necessarily in the implementation of whatever research is being written about, that they wouldn't get an authorship line. I don't know. I've never heard that. It's so fascinating. Maybe it's a distinction between this type of research and what I've gotten used to.
Well, I just saw Jeannie write a comment that grant medical writers are consultants, not necessarily full-time staff for a team. I am, I'm with Dr. Kistler here. I mean, from my own personal experience, as you know me very well, Dr. Patino, that, authorship traditionally has always been a very, very protected piece, right? But I think as the field evolved, I can see that, bringing in a professional writer who does not actually participate and not actually gain authorship, but it's actually someone who is professional in contributing to that technical skill, which is writing, can be actually extremely valuable. Like I said, because even now, my conversations with people that are still doing research, they always say, we have so much data, we have so much this and that, none of us have time to write, or none of us have time to actually kind of like put it all together, right? And so, a medical writer is definitely an essential, I think, person that can help. I mean, I'm plugging this because, you know, I teach the writing class. So, so, so I've made some of my own students come to this workshop today. So that's terrific. And hopefully people gain an understanding that every single one of these roles are super, super important and probably, you know, still evolving. And, you know, the roles are still evolving too.
Do you want to mention that journals, as you know, have specific requirements for authorship? So if you don't, when you're checking these things off as you submit your journal, a person who's a medical writer may not necessarily fit the authorship requirement. Each journal is different, and so you know, you may then get an acknowledgement. Your name may be added in the acknowledgement. So you have to be very specific and check out those requirements for authorship. Thank you.
Jeannie, I have a feeling that you have some experience. You've been part of writing many, many articles, haven't you?
In the past, yes. As Athena is well aware, how many we used to submit when we used to work together for a particular doctor. And he churned out articles on a regular basis. And they're just because I helped format or you know, get it started to a certain point, and same as Athena, she would help write large sections of them. That doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, you may get authorship on it.
Thank you. Kim, thank you for the comment. Where was I? I'm going to start with regulatory affairs specialists. These are people that ensure that research and clinical trials comply with regulatory requirements and helps with submissions to regulatory authorities. Then you have a role called pharmacovigilance specialists. These are people who monitor the safety of drugs and medical products during clinical trials and post-market surveillance. You have a clinical research director who oversees strategic direction and management of clinical research programs within an organization. You have a position called clinical research associate, which are, they monitor clinical trial sites, ensuring compliance with protocols and regulations. So I think my, you know, my objective here is there are so many roles that we need and that are part of not only clinical translational research, but research in general, that, you know, that can be very exciting to be part of, you know, driving research, but in very many different areas. Not everyone is cut out to be a, you know, going to be like a pharmacist or a doctor or any type of field where you're actually seeing patients. There are many other roles that are really important in this field, and it would to move the science forward. And I just want to get you excited that there are, and all of these are exciting things. I would, you know, I'm a physician, I'm a clinician, I am a researcher, I'm an educator, but some of these, I think I could be a medical writer. Like once I retire, I could be a medical writer, and I would be really happy. Any comments? Thank you. Thank you. So I just wanted to bring up, like, if anyone is interested in becoming a clinical translational researcher and being part of a team of clinical translational researcher, NIH or the National Institutes of Health have come up with this paradigm of what are the skills that one has to have to do this. And one of them is rigorous researcher, which sounds obvious, a team player, because this type of research is done in teams with the team members have different areas of expertise. So they have to work well as teams. They have to be a boundary crosser. This is a field of research where we're trying to constantly looking for new interventions. So you have to have that mindset of looking, out of the box, interpreting the literature and getting new ideas. They have to be a process innovator. A lot of science is about process and not about ideas. And you have to understand process and maybe have to innovate sometimes for research to go forward. You have to be a domain expert. I think this is more straightforward. Whatever research you're doing, whatever field, you have to have the expertise. You have to know the domain well. I love this one. You have to be a skilled communicator. And that means not only, writing, but being good in communicating with your team. So it's not these big roles of presenting in front of 1,000 people. It's connecting with people that will help you do the research, or with funders that will give you money. So you have to be a very skilled communicator to be in this field. And then I like this one because no one really knows what this is a systems thinker. It's hard. This one's a hard one. This means that you can't only have expertise in your field. You kind of, when you're doing research, you have to have that big picture. What if all the parts are in the research that you're doing? And how are those, you may have a research question, but maybe you have to think about, am I going to go through the process of writing a grant, getting money, and doing the research when I don't understand if, like, an intervention, will be limited by the university, by public health, by many institutions, the big picture. So you kind of have to understand that. This is a hard competency to develop, but, and I don't think, truthfully, we have great educational efforts towards this yet, but I believe that this is an important part of being a successful researcher that actually develops interventions that improves human health. Not just publish, but that you actually make an impact on human health. So I just wanted to, again, rigorous researcher, team player, boundary crosser, process innovator, domain expert, skilled communicator, and systems thinker. I put the link. I'll give you all this. I'll give you the copy of these slides so that you can all have this information. So some characteristics of a clinical translational team members. So when you see this, there's a really nice video from NIH showing this. It gives examples. So I think you're going to have fun with this one. And so now I'm going to talk about job opportunities in clinical translational research. So you have the scientists. So the person that obtains funding, comes up with the design, conducts experiments, analyzes data and interprets data, is responsible for publishing and disseminating results. Does that sound familiar? So this is the typical scientist. But then you have a coordinator. These are professionals that are key in the process, that manage and coordinate research studies, ensuring that that we're adhering to protocols, manual of procedures, standard operating procedures and regulations. And then we have an associate CRA. So CRAs are people who monitor clinical trial sites, ensuring compliance with protocols and regulations. So these are people that will come to the university if you're doing a clinical trial, especially for a pharmaceutical company, and will make sure that you're complying with everything that you said that is expected of the trial and that you said you were going to do. A trial manager is responsible for planning, executing, and overseeing clinical trials, including budget management and team coordination. That's a hard one. The money and making sure everyone gets along and is doing things that they're supposed to do. Data manager, someone who focuses on collecting, managing, and analyzing clinical trial data or of any study type to ensure its accuracy and compliance. A biostatistician that uses statistical methods to analyze the data for clinical trials or other studies helping to interpret results and make informed decisions. Many times there's missing data or things weren't collected well, and the biostatistician can help you understand how to deal with those situations. A research coordinator. These are professionals that manage and coordinate clinical trials or any type of study, ensuring that they adhere to the protocols and regulations. The medical writer prepares documentation such as protocols, regulatory submissions, and scientific publications. The regulatory affairs specialist ensures that the research and clinical trials comply with regulatory requirements and helps with submissions to regulatory authorities. A clinical project manager manages the overall planning and execution of clinical research projects, including timelines and budgets. A pharmacovigilance specialist. These are individuals that monitor the safety of drugs and medical products during clinical trials and post-market surveillance. Then a clinical research director. This is someone who oversees the strategic direction and management of clinical research programs within an organization. So my question to you is, are any of these roles, these possible jobs you may have in the future, new to you? Or were you aware of all these things that are related to research, are crucial to research, and most importantly, crucial to improving the health of individuals? Are any of these new to the group? Yeah? Can you name one of them?
I have never heard of a I don't know how to pronounce it. Hold on.
Pharmacovigilance.
Pharmacovigilance specialist. I think as far as the positions that you have mentioned so far, a lot of them are pretty underrated and not known, because oftentimes I think the role of the researcher, the person who conducts the research, is more spotlighted compared to other team members.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of researchers do these jobs. It's not like there's one person doing each of these things. A lot of researchers do 3, 4, 5 of these things. But I just want you to know that there's a career in each of these things. And, you can be a medical writer for many research groups. You can be a research coordinator for many groups. Any other comments on all these opportunities? Athena, what do you think?
I think that yes, and I think first of all, I think a lot of our students are probably not familiar with any of this. And I also want to point out, having been a project manager myself, but not specifically clinical project manager, obviously my work was all population-based. A lot of times, when someone is in the role, they actually cover multiple trials, multiple projects as well. So, a clinical project manager is not just usually running one project. They're running multiple projects.
Yeah, it's kind of like the same thing that a researcher is doing various studies at the same time. They just aren't doing one. This is the same thing. You're part of many, and I think, as probably the research groups that have more resources are able to have more of all these roles filled. But many don't, and they have to fill them anyways. But I think the important message is someone has to fill these roles, right? And it may be one person that has 3 or 4 of these roles. Or hopefully you have enough money or to actually hire people who will do this. It's hard to do all these things at the same time. I especially, like, I come from Argentina. A research team is probably 2 or 3 people who do all this without hardly any money. So I understand this well, but I also understand, and I like that we've actually are now coming up with roles and definitions that could maybe help us, at least, some key, and also give opportunities to all the students that are graduating from these programs to have a job when they graduate.
So I guess the more important question is, if let's say somebody here today is interested in them, how do we go about pursuing the opportunities?
Yeah. How do you get trained? How do you get access? How do you,
Yeah.
I don't have the answers to that, Athena, but I think it's a good project. I'm really, truthfully, preparing for this has, you kind of know this, but then when you actually see all these roles and analyze them, I just think of all the students that go through a program like public health or epidemiology and never find a job, a job in this area. And there are so many.
Diana, you raised your hand. You have a question?
Yeah, so I kind of didn't know the names of like half of these specialties because our research associate 3 does like all of it basically.
Exactly.
We're a small lab, so she does everything, right? But she's leaving soon, so she's kind of giving us like, you're gonna do this and you'll do this and you'll do this kind of situation. So after coming out of this, I didn't, let's say, specifically get a certificate or get, the classic training for this type of stuff. But could I say, oh yes, I have done just regulatory affairs specialist duties, if I were to can I put that on my resume, even though maybe I didn't get the proper title for it?
Yes, you can definitely say you have experience and show the experience. Absolutely. Yeah.
I have a question as well. The NIH model shows the patients and the participants in the center whose job is working directly with the community to ensure, all the pieces of the community are integrated into, across the spectrum, across the research cycle.
Well, I can give you an example that I am part of. So I'm part of a huge grant that USC got from NIH. It's within the clinical translational science part of NIH. And they have given us, I think there's about 61 universities that have this grant. And this grant is clinical translational research. Some focus on preclinical, first human studies, clinical trials. Our CTSI is focused on clinical and mostly community engaged research. So, and I would say more than a third of the money of the grant goes to that. So I think NIH is really invested. And as the years have gone by, I've been part of this grant for about, 8 to 10 years. More and more and more community engagement the government is recognizing that we really need the money to do this. And my department also, the community engagement is really strong, and they're getting not only from NIH, but from other entities to do this.
So I think that's also, important roles that people might play on a team that does this type of research, is being able to be the connection to the community to get the and I think our students, many of them would be really interested in something kind of in that direction.
Yeah, because you could be a project manager, a research coordinator in this type of setting. And usually, for example, a lot of the individuals who are part of community engagement within our grant, I would say the majority are bilingual. they either know Spanish or whatever, if it's whatever community we're working with, there are people within the academic setting that actually speak their language. It's really exciting, very exciting. I'm almost done. I'm just going to name a couple of things that are available at USC. For example, study coordinators and clinical research coordinators. I'm not going to read the responsibilities. You can have that in the slides, but I'll just go through the titles. Community engagement specialist and community health workers, statisticians, analysts, and data specialist, a program specialist, manager, and director of teams, regulatory specialists, contracts and grants, research nurse, principal investigators. We have available here a USC jobs board and a link that everyone can go to and search what currently is available at USC for jobs in research within the CTSI, community engagement, clinical research coordinators. And then job opportunities in big pharma. Those can be clinical trial assistant, clinical research associate, or a study monitor. A study monitor is someone that goes, for example, let's say there's a new drug, it has to be, it's gone through all the phases, and now we're going to do these big studies in large populations in different hospitals. There has to be someone like a study monitor that goes to the different hospitals to make sure that the study is being well run in each of those settings. Data science specialist, regulatory specialist. I'm going to read this one. Prepare and manage documents related to study startup process like ethic approvals and other essential study documents. A quality assurance specialist, someone who develops report documenting any problems or future issues in the quality of product and create plan of action to address the issue. A scientific medical writer, that one's more straightforward, and a research scientist and a research director. I'm going to thank Jeannie for putting this together, but she put the responsibilities, but also found, the salaries for each of these areas. So again, so many opportunities to be part of clinical translation, so many job titles, so many important job titles that we really need great people to be part of. And I think of great people, of people like you who are getting trained, maybe not specifically in these things, but in the area of coming up with research questions that answer important questions to improve human health. Jeannie wrote, yes, just a few. There are different levels for some. For example, research coordinator levels 1 to 3. The salaries range differ by the region you live in the US. Thanks, Jeannie. So some additional career info that you may want to go and get access to, some more information. You have the Association of Clinical Research Professionals, Clinical Research Career Lattice, the Society of Clinical Research Associates, payscale.com, which provides job descriptions, skill education requirements, and salary information. And then the SCCTSI website, which is what we're part of, Careers in Clinical Translational Research. Again, I want to thank Jeannie for putting this together for all of you who are here. And I believe that's it. Are there any questions, comments, or ideas or suggestions? I'm excited. Usually it's rare that I'm so excited after interacting with a population that I barely know, people I barely know, except Athena. And it's just been really nice. Very nice to interact with all of you. So any questions or comments?
Yes, I had a question, Dr. Patino. But really quick before I ask the question, for those who have not put their emails in the chat, please do so we can send you the post survey. So there's a lot of concern in clinical research to maintain a homogeneous demographic of people. From, well, I guess anybody who's interested, has experience in maybe community outreach or just gathering people for those clinical trials or any research of that fact, how would you improve the ability to collect a homogeneous population?
No, I'm not sure I understood. Sorry, the question.
So like for some clinical research, there might be more white people, Hispanics, but not necessarily a demographic that represents all populations. Maybe that study is catered towards that specific demographic, but I just wanted to ask what your thoughts on regarding how to be more inclusive in terms of studies, or what ways can we improve getting perhaps minorities into trials. I'm not quite sure how to word it, but
I think I understand. I think I understand what you're saying. I think I have a good example. When I was working at Hopkins, I was working at Hopkins as a researcher. I left Argentina. I went to Hopkins to get trained as a researcher to go back. I never went back because I met my American husband and stayed here. But when I was at Hopkins at the School of Medicine, I was involved in doing a study to create a questionnaire on how to assess asthma control across all populations, but mostly with focus on African Americans and non-white populations. So to create the questionnaire, we had to do focus groups because we wanted to get the information, like, for example, a question on the questionnaire is, have you had an asthma attack? Someone who's Hispanic and maybe someone who's Asian completely understands that question different. So we had to do a lot of focus groups to be able to, get information on, first of all, what does someone understand as an asthma attack? And what other names do they have for an asthma attack? So, but to be able to do that, we had to do a lot of community engagement with, different leaders in the community. First of all, we had to talk with them, tell them about our study, and so that they would, first of all, be okay for us recruiting people from the community and also helping us recruit from the. So I think it's about creating partners that we're not used to creating and being able to speak in a way that it's fruitful. And I think a lot of us are not trained on how to do that. We just go in and expect people to be part of a study without any of their input or any of their concerns. And I think that has to be part of our training when we're going through training and becoming researchers. And I don't think that it has been well established at least in places that I know of. So it's all about, first of all, caring. Second of all, having really good people to create educational efforts, and then people going through that and actually demonstrating that they've learned this and they're sensitive to this. I think that's a really important issue, very important.
Yeah, I think just to expand on Dr. Patino's answer is really, that's why we are at CTSI really focusing on training physician scientists and doing research in diverse populations. I mean, so that is the point, is they never thought about it before. So how are they going to really create that question that helps expand their research to a larger and more diverse population? So they have to learn how to think about it, be trained and think about it, and then put that in towards their research question so that they can expand the population. So that's what we do. That's what Dr. Patino does, really.
Yeah, and it's not just about learning research methodology, right? It's just human communication, a lot of it, and being sensitive. I don't know how you teach that or transform someone like that, but it's important, Naomi. It's huge. Any other comments or questions?
I had a question. So I feel like I'm in kind of an interesting position because how do you push for, because you can have all the training and all the certificates and everything and be, the greatest scientist ever, but if there's no interest or interest in what you're trying to study, right? Because one of the things that I'm really interested in is neglected tropical disease, because I believe that they won't be neglected for very long, especially with climate changes that's coming along. They will be very relevant to populations that had never seen it before. But right now it feels like no one cares, no one's that interested, or it's a later problem. It's a problem for later. So how do you kind of push or look for places that kind of see the same vision as you? Because I feel like there's just not that much interest in it because everybody's pushing it off as a later problem.
I mean, I think there's like two pathways. Like, where do you find them? That has to do a lot with reading a lot about research and networking a lot and really trying to find those people. I can tell you that within the Clinical Translational Science Institute, that we've been, funded 2 rounds, so at least 10 years and a couple more, right? And I can see the transformation of the people that get hired has changed completely. And it's more and more diverse each year. And people, we've really understood and learned that if we don't do that, we're not going to be successful in improving the health of people in Los Angeles. That is so diverse. And why did that happen? First of all, because there was a lot of money from the government to create these institutes. Again, there's like 60, and many of them have this goal. And more, the people who are running the grants and who are part are diverse. And I think someone train diverse people to be in these roles. Someone put diversify the leadership and workforce. Kim, you put that, and that's slowly happening, but it's slow. But it is happening, and I just think everyone has to have this mindset. Like it's natural for me, right? I'm Latina. It's natural for me to be sensitive to this. But I think there's more and more people of all race ethnicities in the US and in the world that are doing. How do we sensitize people to do that? I can't answer that, but I would have to think about it. And I promise that I will think about it more than I have and maybe get back to you. But by asking me that, you've sensitized me. So I think you and all of you can do this too.
So I also think it probably depends on where you live, right? So you said you were interested in tropical diseases, correct? Well, in LA, we're not going to have that many tropical diseases and that kind of thing. So it depends, I believe, in what country, what area. And so it depends really who you're going to be able to help you bring that to light, right? Some countries will have more funding towards that, right? Because that impacts them more. Maybe not so much here in the NIH, in the United States. And so therefore NIH doesn't push for that as much or fund that as much. So you need to find your niche. And that's where, as you go through like a PhD program, you find mentors that are specific to that research, and they help you, like Dr. Patino said, to network and get into the to find that funding to be able to do that kind of research.
You know, within my department, there is a division of global health, you know, and so that group does a lot of research worldwide and very successfully. But that doesn't mean that they don't do research in the U.S. and from what they've learned globally, they bring to the U.S. So I think that's another way of seeing this, of what we can learn from other places and bring here, and they are. So I just want to, I think we, I guess we have a little bit of more time, but I just want to offer that if you want to continue to talk about any of this with me or anyone I can connect you with at USC or beyond, to really get at these really important issues that you are already bringing to the table at such an early age, which to me is very exciting. Very, very exciting. So please reach out to Athena and Athena to me, or however you want to do it. And I can assure you that we are all the people who are here right now from USC are very, very invested in this and in helping people do this. All righty.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing this workshop with us today. We really appreciate that. And if there's any question, I think all the participants here, we kind of know each other, and you can follow up with PHSA. And obviously, I think you know me too, so you can get in touch with me. Diana and I are in big conversations about her career plans. So more to come, Diana.
And we should have formalized this maybe to create a questionnaire to evaluate the session, but maybe Athena, you could get together and just give us some feedback on what went well, what we could have done, you know, what ideas of what we could have done and what didn't work well.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.